The Resident Evil 4 Remake is an upcoming third-person shooter video game that is being developed by M2 and published by Capcom. The RE4 Remake is the next Resident Evil franchise game that will receive the modernized treatment following the releases of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. The original Resident Evil 4 was released back in 2005, and since then fans have been hoping that Capcom would find a way to bring back this story in a modern way. So let's break down all the rumors, leaks, and new lore that was created for this game. As always, all the sources will be linked in the description below, so make sure to check those out and support those original writers. And with that out of the way, let's get into everything we know about Resident Evil 4 Remake. Let's start with some background on the original Resident Evil 4, which, as I said, was released back in 2005 for the GameCube, and the game was eventually released for the PlayStation 2 as well due to a loophole in the exclusivity deal with Nintendo. The game ended up being a massive hit for Capcom and went on to sell 10.2 million copies across all platforms the game has been released on. The game went more in the action-oriented route, got away from the horror routes, and also had a smaller role for Umbrella in the game and introduced new characters, which went on to create this new precedent of Resident Evil games. The first news of a Resident Evil 4 remake came in April of 2020 from the Video Games Chronicle. According to their sources, the Resident Evil 4 remake had entered full production and had an estimated release window of sometime in the year 2022. And they also state that pre-production had started in 2018, so the game has already been in development for a few years. The project is being developed by M2, which is a new studio formed by the former head of Platinum Games. The remake will be directed by a newcomer to the Resident Evil franchise and won't be anyone who has directed any of the previous games. Liam Robertson, who is another gaming insider and frequently covers canceled games and knows a lot about Capcom, verified the VGC article and says that he has heard similar rumors about the Resident Evil 4 remake as well. Then we get into Dusk Golem, who is a known gaming insider and has a great track record with Resident Evil information, and he came into the mix of VGC and gave additional details that he has heard about this Resident Evil 4 remake project. He says that he assumed the project was going to be leaked eventually, but it's a bad time to leak the project because it's still years away and so early in development, and it's not even going to be the next Resident Evil game that's releasing. So he thinks that the focus should be on Resident Evil Village, but he goes on to say that everything in the VGC article is correct, but there is more information. He says that M2 was formed as a new studio completely to make this Resident Evil 4 remake, and that was the purpose of creating this new studio, and that development did begin in 2018 with the initial release in 2022, but obviously that could be pushed back, just knowing how long sometimes these games take to create. He does go on to say the team is larger than any of the previous Resident Evil remakes, which implies, hopefully at least to me, that this will be a bigger game than the previous remakes, and that M2 is leading development rather than Redworks, who led the Resident Evil 3 remake project, and M2 just assisted. Now it looks like the roles will be reversed. He said that RE3 was the first game that M2 worked on, and the studio is filled with ex-Capcom and ex-Platinum Games individuals. The leak goes on to say that M2 used Resident Evil 3 for practice for their own game Resident Evil 4, and were using the experience to try out new ideas and then to see what reviewers and the community did and didn't like once the game was released. He continues on saying the project does have Shinji Mikami's full approval, who was the original director and writer for Resident Evil 4, but Mikami is unable to help too much with the project due to his time being spent on Ghostwire Tokyo, but he was initially asked if he would like to come back in a larger capacity. So even though he's not involved in a huge extent, he still gave it his blessing and is excited to see what the team comes up with. And the leak closes out by saying there are a few more details, but he doesn't want to say too much because the game is still so early in development and everything is subject to change. He closes by once again reiterating that the team is larger than any of the other teams for these prior remakes, and they spent a lot of time conceptualizing before the 2018 development start. So they wanted to make sure that this game is perfect and brought in a lot of ideas before they brought the team together. And the leak closes out by saying don't expect the game anytime soon, and a reveal at the earliest is a year or two away, but once again, that reveal is not based on insider sources and is just more of a guess from Dusk Golem's point of view. So after all these leaks, once again it was quiet, but fans were now scrubbing the internet for anything that they could find that had to do with Resident Evil, these remakes, and any more news of the Resident Evil 4 remake. Fans found some news later in April. The PlayStation blog did an interview with Sakata, the director of the Resident Evil 3 remake, and he answered questions about the game. The segment of the interview that attracted the most attention was about the Nemesis now being able to infect zombies with this new parasite. When asked about this, Sakata's response says they wanted to differentiate Nemesis from the Tyrant between the Resident Evil 2 remake and Resident Evil 3, and were trying to decide on additional moves to make it look neat. They decided on adapting a version of the Ganado in Resident Evil 4, and they are the main villagers, and they took the type of infection they had and basically tried to make an earlier version of it for Resident Evil 3. He says that Nemesis Alpha was created by imitating the Plagueis design, which was meant to provide more connections between how Nemesis fits into the Resident Evil franchise and more closely ties Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 3 together. And Sakata also closed by saying, this was a brand new idea for the remake, and when they originally made Resident Evil 3, there was no intention of adding these additional elements to the Nemesis, and it was something this new team came up with. So what does that mean for us? Well, it shows a slight lore change that directly ties together the game's Resident Evil 3 and the Resident Evil 4 remake. The Nemesis Alpha infection could be an early attempt at Umbrella working on the Plagueis infection, and could mean that Umbrella could play a bigger role in this upcoming remake than they did in the original, which was one of the criticisms of Resident Evil 4. People wanted to see more Umbrella, whether that was a secret lab or just some sort of impact that they had, which was not there in the original game. But with this new connection, it could be possible that we see them perfect this Nemesis Alpha virus, turn it into the Plagueis virus, and then have some sort of facility that we find in the Resident Evil 4 remake. And another reason they could change the lore, because in the beginning of Resident Evil 4, it's announced that Umbrella was disbanded right at the start, so potentially this could change, and we'll just have to wait and see how they adapt this into the story, especially considering that M2, who's working on the remake, also worked on Resident Evil 3's remake. So it's possible they wanted certain things placed in the game to tie the games together. And now let's cover a few other comments from Dusk Golem. One comment came from a fan who asked if they bought a copy of Resident Evil 4 for the PS4, would they get a free upgrade when the remake comes out? Dusk Golem said the game is not a remaster and it's a complete remake and reimagining and will be a completely new game. So no. And I would say I'd recommend going and playing Resident Evil 4 and not worrying about spoilers, because I think the games will be different enough where you can still enjoy both as separate entities. Are they still following the structure set by the RE3 and 2 remakes, or are they going to be doing a parallel the OG series took and have RE4 remake be more action focused and contextual melee combat with invincibility frames and larger weapon choices? Dusk Golem said the remake is going to be neither of these options, so it's not going to be super closely related to the 2 and 3 remakes, but it's also not going to be super similar to the original Resident Evil 4. He says when Resident Evil 4 came out, it revolutionized the series and gaming landscape, and that if the game played like the original or the current remakes, it wouldn't achieve what the original Resident Evil 4 had accomplished. Which sounds exciting, but any ideas on what this actually means for gameplay or story is yet to be seen, and all of it is just speculation at this point, what this comment means and how they're going to really advance this game into the next gen. And then the last real comment with information also came from Dusk Golem in August of 2020, when he stated that Resident Evil 4 is in a bit of a worrying position right now. Now, he doesn't give any context as to why. It could be due to the leaks, it could be due to them just struggling to put the game together, it could be a multitude of things, so we just aren't sure, but that was was just in August, which is somewhat recent, but hopefully they can get by it without too many developmental delays. So what should we expect in the coming years? Well, as of now, the game is still in production and probably halfway or more than halfway through the development process. The team is larger than any other remake they've created up to this point, and they are trying to create something new compared to the previous remakes. This one seems like it really will be completely different and break away from the mold, and also because they have a bigger team, it's a bigger game and will take more time to put together. The game itself is being developed by a new team at Capcom, but it does have a lot of veteran members and ex-members who have worked on previous games, and the blessing of the original Resident Evil 4 creator. The teams behind the Resident Evil 3 remake might have been setting the groundwork for connecting the new nemesis to the Plagueis virus, and the release window as of now is 2022, but could easily be pushed out further depending on how development progresses. If the game truly is going to be released sometime in 2022 or later, it's most likely that the game will be released only on next generation consoles, although it is possible the game could be released on current gen and next gen consoles, like what the leaks state for Resident Evil Village. So we still have a lot of time until we probably get any sort of official announcement or first look, and I wouldn't expect to see anything substantial until after the release of Resident Evil Village. Either way though, I'm excited to see how the franchise continues and how they will turn one of the most critically and commercially successful Resident Evil games in history remade for a modern generation. And with that, that's really everything we know about the Resident Evil 4 remake, and that's where I'm going to end this video. Make sure to like and share, subscribe for weekly gaming news, and I will see you guys in the next one.